Hi everyone, it's Ruth. In this video today, we're going to be taking a look at sun printing. Now, sun printing can be a lot of fun. We can use some just normal everyday household items to create these really wonderful prints. And we're going to be walking through that process today, start to finish. Now, a little disclaimer before we get started. This process does take a few hours, but I promise this video is not a few hours. We've got some pauses that happen throughout the video. But let's go ahead and talk about supplies we need for our project today. As always, our first supply is going to be our illustrated instructions. Now for instructions, they're laid out the same way. All our other illustrated instructions are, we have our list of supplies at the top, and then our process is laid out step by step. I'll be guiding us through the process today, but know that if you enjoy this process and you want to repeat it, do it again, you have that recipe card now. We're going to be following along with this one, but this is also a really great place to take notes. And again, there's one part in here that takes about 3-4 hours, depending on how sunny it is. Even though we need the sun for sun printing, there are a couple other ways to get these prints. So if it is a cloudy day or a rainy day or snowy day, something like that, where the skies are gray, you can still do this type of printing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about supplies. Again, we'll need those illustrated instructions. Go ahead and pull those out. The next thing we need is going to be our spice. Turmeric is what we're going to be using to dye our paper today. And this is just regular turmeric that you can get from the grocery store. Ground spice. It's a really pretty yellow, but a little warning. You may be able to see already my hands are colored yellow. And it's because turmeric is a very strong pigment, right? It's a really strong spice. So if you don't want yellow hands like I have, it's good to wear disposable gloves. That'll be really helpful for today. But go ahead and pull out that turmeric. We're going to need some of that today. We're also going to need some isopropyl alcohol. Now, this is alcohol you can get anywhere, basically. I'm using 91% today, but you can use the 70%. That one works just as well. And we only need a little bit. I'm going to be doing just 4 papers today in our process. So we only need a little bit of that alcohol and turmeric. Right. Speaking of papers, I'm going to go ahead and use watercolor paper. I like using watercolor paper for projects like this because it's nice and sturdy, and it can take a lot. And because we're going to get the papers wet, we want them to hold up well. And so that watercolor paper is the best one to use for something like this. So go ahead and pull out your paper. Like I said, I'm going to be using 4 pieces of paper today. The next thing we need is going to be our dye material. Right? So we are going to be making prints with our leaves. I'm going to be using some leaves that I got from mums, some chrysanthemums. And then I've got this flower thing. I'm not sure what it is. It was in a bouquet, but it's really pretty and I think it'll make a nice design. So this is my material that I'm going to be dyeing today. One of the things that I found that's helpful is having a sheet of plexiglass or glass, and it just kind of helps hold everything in place. And I'll explain this more as we go through this process. Know that it's not absolutely necessary to have this, but having a little sheet of plexiglass or glass can be really helpful in this process. The next thing we need is going to be a container. I'm going to be using just a little kind of cake pan, 8x8 cake pan, as my base today to mix my turmeric and alcohol in. I'm also going to be using a spoon. Again, that turmeric is kind of messy, so it's good to use something you don't mind getting a little stained. And so this is just a spoon that I keep in my studio. The next thing we'll need is going to be borax. We're going to use this in the beginning of our process, but this is going to help us in the end to really set our print. And then the last thing we need is going to be a spray bottle with 1/2 cup of warm water, right? So I've got my spray bottle handy, and those are going to be ones we use in the end again. All right, so let's go ahead and start our process. If we look at our illustrated instructions, that very first step is to pour a thin layer of the alcohol, that isopropyl alcohol, onto our tray and sprinkle turmeric on top of it. We want to cover the entire area. So let's go ahead and start that. I'm going to go ahead and open my alcohol. I got a brand new one, so I'm ready to go. Ready for a lot of prints. So we're going to use just a little bit of that isopropyl alcohol. We'll pour some on the bottom, and I'm not doing a whole lot. I'm just doing a nice thin layer on the bottom, maybe going maybe an eighth of an inch. We don't need a lot. We need just enough to cover the paper. Then I'm going to take my turmeric and just kind of sprinkle it on top. And then I'm going to take my spoon and just kind of mix it in. We're not wanting to make a paste, but we're wanting to make a pretty yellow consistency. And I'm just kind of mixing that in. Now, again, this is just the alcohol and the turmeric. I'm going to add just a little more. And hopefully you can see that color change. We want that the isopropyl alcohol to kind of pick up as much of that pigment as possible. And so we're just kind of mixing it up, mixing it in. And you can already see that yellow that's kind of staining everything, right? So I'm going to get my turmeric, my alcohol out of the way. All right. And our next step is going to be submerging our paper in our new pigment, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my spoon. And so I've got my tray here. I'm just going to take my paper and dip it in. Now, again, this is where gloves might come in handy if you don't mind getting yellow, but gloves can kind of help prevent that. So I mixed it up quite a little bit. I flipped it over both sides, and I'm just going to kind of lay it out here. I'm going to do that with each of my papers, right? Again, we don't want like a huge amount on there, but we want to make sure that paper is saturated. Okay. So I'm just going to stack them up here, because what we're going to do is after we get them covered in our pigment here, our turmeric alcohol mixture, we're going to let them dry completely. Now you want to be careful where you're drying them because this is light reactive, right? We want to let them dry kind of in the dark. So the darkest place in your house or your apartment is going to be the best place for them, right? All right, so you can see I've got them both sides covered nicely. And so I'm going to go ahead and lay them on my drying mat. And I encourage you to do the same. And we'll be back here in just a little minute after they're dry. Now, after your papers have dried, and hopefully it didn't take long, if you just laid them out on like a drying rack or a cooling rack and let them dry completely, they're ready for the next step. And our next step is actually placing our natural material on there, our printing material on there, and getting it ready for the exposure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sheet. I have a sheet of plexiglass here. So I'm just going to take that as my base, but you can use a cardboard, you can use tray, you can use any kind of like a magazine, anything that's kind of flat on the bottom. I'm just going to use this plexiglass sheet. Now I've got two pieces of my paper that are completely dried, and I'm just going to set them on top. Okay. My next step, after I get my paper on there, and remember it's completely dried, but after I get my paper on there, is to add my natural material. And so I'm just very carefully going to lay my material out. You can use fresh flowers and leaves for this, or you can use dried flowers and leaves. Either one is good. All right, so I've got my natural material laid out on here. Okay. Now the next step is to expose it. One of the things that I've learned is that it helps to have a sheet of plexiglass or glass to put on top. It's not necessary, but it is helpful. you want to make sure that there's nothing on here, because if there is something on that plexiglass or glass, it's going to transfer, right? That shape is going to transfer. And so I just want my natural material to be the thing that transfers today. All right, so I've got my plexiglass on there, and I'm going to be really careful with this. One of the things that helps, I've found, is binder clips. And so I'm just going to real quickly clip some of my binder clips on. This is going to hold that plexiglass in place for me, so there's no jostling around. All right, so I have my sheet, right? I've got it. Again, I've got a plexiglass base, and you don't have to have that. Any kind of solid surface, a tray, a plate, like a cardboard, anything like that will work. But whatever you put on top, it needs to be clear. And that's because what the light is exposing these shapes. And so what's going to happen is that these outside colors are going to fade, but whatever is underneath our natural material is going to be left, right? And so we want to take this and put it in the sun, and it will take a few hours. If it's really sunny outside, it'll take just a couple hours. If it's cloudy, it may take all day. One of the things that I have tried and have been successful with is putting it under a bright light or a plant light. That works just as well. It takes a little longer than using actual sun, but it does work. And you'll be able to see the color in the background fade a little bit. So let's go ahead, once you have your stuff ready to be exposed, let's go ahead and put it in the sunlight. And I'll see you back here in just a little bit again. So here are some that I exposed earlier today, and I'm going to use these while my others are getting the sunlight that they need. So I'm going to go ahead. These are ready. You can see that the paper is faded quite a bit. Let me get an original out so you can see the difference. So this is the original paper, and you can see it's a much brighter yellow. So it's faded quite a bit. And that's really what you want to see. Once we get it exposed, and this one was for 3 hours, right at 3 hours, we'll take it inside, and I'm going to go ahead and pull off my binder clips now and take off my sheet of plexiglass. And of course, take off my natural material. Now, one of the things you may notice, and you can sort of barely see it, is there is a little bit of exposure of the leaves, right? So what we're going to do now is bring in that borax and warm water. So I'm going to lay my pieces out here and start spraying. I'm doing 2 teaspoons of the borax with half a cup of warm water. I have it in a spray bottle. I just shook it up, and I'm just going to spray my paper. And you can see that the image is starting to be exposed, right? We're just spraying it a little bit. So what this does, that borax and water mixture, it stops the print, or stops the light from affecting the print, right? So this is called basically a stop, right? So now this can be exposed, it can be in the light, and it won't change the color. Once you do just a quick spray, like I just did, nothing super fast or it like fancy or anything like that, just a real quick spray. You can spray it, and then like you'll see that color change, and then take it over to the sink and just rinse it with a little water, right? Now, you'll see these are ones I did earlier, right? That I sprayed with that borax, rinsed in some water, and now they're in that drying process. And this is my finished piece. These are ones I was using just a little while ago, right? I've got my leaves laid out here and the flowers. You have a really fun sun print. Well, hopefully you've had success with yours. This is a lot of fun to kind of play around with. And like I said, the sun, these are sun prints. They need the sun, but there are ways around that too. You can use a plant light or really bright light to expose it. It may take a few hours longer using artificial light than using sunlight. And sometimes it may take a whole day to expose it. But the good thing is you get some really lovely prints from this. Well, happy printing, everyone. I wish you luck with your sun prints, and hopefully we'll see you soon.